Nobody should dare to beat you. That's what the novice politician told the angry crowd. And that message really resonated with them. Wow, finally somebody who understands us, who gets us. And that launched his political career like a rocket. Because he was a brilliant political psychologist. He recognized that curating this latent sense of grievance, cultivating this feeling of victimization, resentment, betrayal, stifled entitlement, and fear was a potent political cocktail. And it worked for him. Within 2 years, he was the dominant political figure in his country. That quest for complete power led to the collapse of his country, which was once an object of envy, and a series of 4 wars that killed 130,000 people in 8 years. Those sentiments may ring a bell with you. When he addressed the crowd at Kosovo Polje, the field of blackbirds in Kosovo in 1989, that speech drew far more than the American Carnage speech, inaugural, drew 1 million people. Some estimates are more. And you might have guessed, that man was Slobodan Milosevic, and that country was Yugoslavia. Now, what we had in that war and in his political career was a need for constant forward movement. He needed to maintain momentum. He needed to just keep on swimming. And so after a war would end, his star fell. His appeal dissipated. His people started to make their dissatisfaction felt. And so he had to keep on moving. What got me interested in that part of the world? As a young man, I went to go teach English in what was then Czechoslovakia, full of optimism, naive optimism and hope for the peaceful democratic future we all, at least I thought, would follow the end of the Cold War. Then the wars in Yugoslavia began. I had thought I wanted to be a diplomat, foreign service officer. And then in summer of 1993, 3 foreign service officers resigned from the State Department over American non-intervention in Bosnia. And my thought was, God, I hope if I were in their position, I would have the guts to do what they did. Immediately the thought came to me, why would I put myself in that position? So that broke the spell of wanting to be a diplomat, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to affect policy, so I wrote letters to the editor. Ultimately, those letters got me a job with an organization that 2 of those resignees founded some years later. And that got me involved in my career as a policy analyst and advocate. So looking back on my own country now from a distance, lived in Sarajevo 10 years before coming here to start at St. Andrews, it's a sense of bewilderment and disorientation, like looking through the wrong end of a telescope, because I feel this odd sense of recognition, and I understand this formula. I've seen this. I recognize this political formula, and I know it doesn't end well. So there were 2 words that I learned in Bosnia that I think are relevant to our current condition. The first word is inat. It's a Turkish word, but it's used throughout the Balkans. And it's usually translated as spite. But that doesn't really do it justice. What it really means is the essence is best summed up as, this is going to hurt me, but it's going to hurt you more, and I'm going to enjoy watching you suffer. And so it's kind of like Schadenfreude, but nastier. And to me, that's the essence of Trumpism. Those of us assembled, globalist elites, which we would be called just for being here, the fact that we react, many of us, with horror, disdain, Tourette's fits in my case when I hear news, is not incidental. It's actually kind of the point. That's the red meat for those who see Donald Trump as their popular tribune. It's its own reward. The second term is selling fog. Somebody who sells fog is trying to get you to see value and substance in the formless. He's a shyster, a huckster, a bullshit artist, a con man. And what's most important for someone trying to sell fog is not actually winning, that's nice, but the real most important thing is being seen to win, being able to brand oneself as a winner. So when Slobodan Milosevic was at the Dayton peace talks in late 1995, the talks that ultimately ended the war that he helped begin 4 years before, he stormed into the American negotiators a week and a half into the discussion saying, "You guys are trying to cheat me. This won't work." Because over the course of those negotiations, less than 49% of the territory that he'd been expected to believe ultimately was allocated through agreed arrangements on the territorial division. He said, "I don't care what I get. Rocks, swamp, doesn't matter, but it has to add up to 49% or I leave." He got what he wanted. But after Serbian forces withdrew from Kosovo in 1999, he tried to market that as a win as well. So I certainly thought that our institutions, our traditions would insulate us from this sort of predation from within. And there's some truth to that. Definitely our courts have stood up and held up well. But humans being human, no society is immune to that kind of sentiment and appeal to emotion. So, what ultimately does for a demagogue? Well, in Serbia's case, this may also sound familiar. Slobodan Milosevic thought, well, I could call an election. My opposition is too divided. I'll win it. He called an election he didn't have to call in 2000. And his people, who recognized there's no way out with this guy in power, we're going to remain isolated, took the opportunity to mobilize behind a single candidate. And when the election result came down and it wasn't the one he expected, he didn't want to respect it. And then they physically mobilized against him. And ultimately he was ousted. But that he never showed remorse. Even when he was on trial for war crimes, he saw this as a theatrical opportunity to tell his side of the story at The Hague. And he ultimately died without being convicted. So what message does that leave us for today? Well, demagogues collapse when they start to buy their own fog, but also when their constituency ceases to buy it. And when ultimately their constituency has to feel betrayed, stop buying that fog. But what does that leave us as a challenge? Because all Western societies are suffering this sort of autoimmune disorder. And there is some good news over the past year. Majority electorates in Austria, in the Netherlands, in France, didn't decide to live on the junk food of Inat and buy fog. I think what it means is that constituency needs to see, first of all, that there's no way forward as we're going, but even more importantly, that there's something in it for them. There's something on offer that's better. So the challenge that we face now is, will we rise to that? Will we attempt to build that? Or will we feed on our own Inat and buy our own fog because it feels right? Thank you.